Good morning, friends. Welcome to another episode of BNN with Bhante Sudarsana. So this morning we will be studying Majjhima Nikaya 12, the Mahāsīhanāda Sutta. And you can find a link of the sutta in the live chat. And welcome to Ella, Jens, Kayo, Marielle, and of course to Bhante Sudarsana, who will be sharing Dharma with us this week. So if you have any questions, as usual, you're welcome to put them in the live chat. And Bhante will answer after he goes through the sutta. And welcome also to Kevin. Buenos dias. All right.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. Today we'll be looking at the first part of the Mahāsīhanāda Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 12. And the sutta is relatively long, so the plan is to do this over the course of 3 days. Though we'll see how much time it actually winds up taking. And as usual, I'll go through the sutta bit by bit and give some explanations here and there, and then about a third of the way through, I'll pause and we can switch to discussion. Advanced warning, this is a sutta which people who are new to Buddhism sometimes find a little bit off-putting. So if there's anything here that seems a bit confusing or not quite right to you, please do type it in the live chat and I can explain what's going on here. So Mahāsīhanāda Sutta, the greater discourse on the lion's roar. So the term lion's roar that we find in the suttas refers to when an enlightened being says something which is a clear, unequivocal expression of the fact that they're an enlightened being. So, for example, when Sariputta gave his first Dhamma talk, that was called his lion's roar. His first Dhamma talk after attaining awakening, that was called Sariputta's lion's roar. So we see that in many places throughout the suttas, the term lion's roar. And this sutta in particular is called the lion's roar because it's all about the Buddha talking about the various amazing and wonderful qualities of Buddhas. So he's speaking in this very open, clear way about the nature of an enlightened being and what makes an enlightened being special. So as usual, I'll start reading through the sutta. So the sutta begins, "Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Vesali in a grove to the west of the town of Bahi. On this occasion, the Lichavi Sunakatta had recently left this Dhamma Vinaya." So Sunakatta had previously been Buddhist, and I think he had been a monk actually. But it says he had recently left this Dhamma Vinaya. In other words, he'd given up on Buddhism. So he had renounced Buddhism and left it behind. And the term Dhamma Vinaya, this is the term which in the suttas is most commonly used to refer to Buddhism. So Dhamma Vinaya means the teachings and the trainings, or doctrine and discipline is one of the older renderings of this phrase. So it's referring to the Buddhist practice. So Buddhist practice has two aspects. It has the concepts, the ideas, and then it has the practices of reforming our conduct. So the teachings and the trainings. The other term which we sometimes see in the suttas to refer to Buddhism is Vibhajavada, which means the doctrine of analysis. a system of breaking things down and analyzing them bit by bit. Anyway, so Sunakatta had been a Buddhist, and then he got fed up with it and decided to quit practicing Buddhism. So the sutta continues. All around Vesali, he was saying, the contemplative Gautama does not have any superhuman states, nor has he attained any distinction in knowledge and vision that would make him noble. In other words, he's saying the Buddha is not enlightened, and he doesn't even have any psychic powers. So superhuman states refers to psychic powers, can also refer to stages of awakening. And distinction in knowledge and vision that would make one noble is referring specifically to stages of awakening. So Sunakatta also says, the contemplative Gautama teaches a Dhamma that is the result of thinking, accompanied by investigation, produced by his own eloquence. In other words, he's saying the Buddha doesn't actually have direct experience of the things he's talking about. He's saying that he thinks the Buddha just made up all his ideas just through logical thought, that it's not based upon directly seeing the true nature of reality. It's just something that the Buddha thought about very carefully and came up with a philosophy through thinking, through logic. And he says he's claiming that the Buddha is very eloquent, that the Buddha can speak very clearly and precisely, which is why people believe what the Buddha says. But then Sunakatta also says, however, when that teaching is taught to anyone, it does lead one who practices it to the correct elimination of suffering. So this is interesting. So even though Sunakatta is criticizing the Buddha, saying that the Buddha doesn't actually have the direct wisdom and insight that the Buddha claims he has, claiming that the Buddha is not actually enlightened, doesn't actually have direct experience of the Dhamma, he is saying, however, the teachings he's giving are actually effective. They really do work in helping people let go of suffering and attain happiness. So the sutta continues. Then in the morning, Venerable Sariputta dressed, took his bowl and robe, and entered Vesali for alms. He heard of the Lichavi Sunakatta saying all around Vesali, the contemplative Gautama does not have any superhuman states, as above. So when Venerable Sariputta had gone for alms in Savatthi, finished his meal and returned from alms round, he approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When he was seated to one side, Venerable Sariputta said to the Blessed One, Bhante, the Lichavi Sunakatta has recently left this Dhamma Vinaya. All around Vesali, he is saying, he repeats what Sunakatta was saying. And the Buddha replies, Sariputta, Sunakatta is an angry, foolish man. This statement he has spoken is the result of anger. Sariputta, thinking, I will speak criticism, this foolish man Sunakatta only speaks praise of the Tathagata. Sariputta, it is praise of the Tathagata when one says, when that teaching is taught to anyone, it does lead one who practices it to the correct elimination of suffering. So just to clarify a little bit here, so the Buddha refers to himself as the Tathagata. So this is quite common in the suttas, the Buddha referring to himself in this way. And the word Tathagata is defined elsewhere in the suttas as meaning, having a few different meanings. So Tatha means as it is, or truth or reality. And the second part can be either Gata, which means gone, or Agata, which means come or arrive. So Tathagata can mean one who has arrived at truth, one who has come to the way things are. It can also mean one who goes by truth, one who goes in accordance with the way things are. So the Buddha explains it in these ways, like one who has arrived at reality, one who has arrived at truth, one who goes in accordance with truth, one whose actions are in line with their statements, and so on. So Tathagata is sometimes translated as truth finder, which is much better than thus come one. So often as this is translated as the thus come one, which never has made any sense to me. Truth finder makes a lot more sense, and that's how the Buddha himself explains this term. So then the Buddha continues. He says, Sariputta, this Dhamma inference about me will never occur to the foolish man Sunakatta. The Blessed One is an Arahant, a fully self-awakened one, perfect in knowledge and conduct, sublime, a world knower, an unsurpassable trainer of trainable people, a teacher of celestial and human beings, a Buddha, a Blessed One. In other words, he's saying that because of Sunakatta's anger and disappointment, he will never come to the realization that the Buddha is in fact fully enlightened. He will never come to recognize the special qualities of a Buddha. So Sunakatta is, because of his own anger, he's not willing to really closely look at what the Buddha is saying and to closely look at the qualities of the Buddha and to recognize the Buddha for the magnificent, fully enlightened being that he is. Further on, he continues, Sariputta, this Dhamma inference about me will never occur to the foolish man Sunakatta. The Blessed One manifests many kinds of psychic powers. Having been one, he becomes many. Having been many, he becomes one. He appears and disappears. He moves unobstructed through walls, fences, and mountains as if it was space. He dives in and out of the earth as if it was water. He moves across water without sinking as if it was earth. He moves cross-legged through the sky like a bird. With his hand, he touches and holds the sun and moon, so powerful and majestic. He personally extends his authority as far as the Brahma world. In other words, the Buddha is saying that actually he does have all kinds of psychic powers. He does have all kinds of paranormal abilities. But that Sunakatta is not willing to see this. Sunakatta is not willing to recognize and acknowledge this. So Sunakatta is so caught in his anger and his viewpoint, his belief that the Buddha is not special, that Sunakatta is then unable to recognize that the Buddha actually does have these abilities. And this is something that's important to mention, by the way. Sometimes people say that the Buddha was just an ordinary human being, but that's not quite true. He was a human being. That much can be said, but he was far from ordinary. The Buddha did have a whole wide array of psychic powers that came about as the result of his practice. But he also wasn't prone to using them all the time. He would use them once in a while when it was helpful to teach the Dhamma, when it would support his efforts to explain or demonstrate the Dhamma to someone. But he wasn't someone who would show off his powers just to amaze people or amuse people. It was something that he would use only when it supported his teaching of the Dhamma. Then he says again, Sariputta, this Dhamma inference about me will never occur to the foolish man Sunakatta. With the divine ear element, which is purified and transcends human hearing, the Blessed One hears both kinds of sounds, celestial and human, far and near. In other words, the Buddha is saying that he has the ability to hear devas as well as humans. So most people can't hear devas, even though there's devas everywhere. So you might call them angels or spirits, celestial beings. They're everywhere. But most people can't see them or hear them, except for a small handful of people. So the Buddha says that he's fully capable of hearing celestial beings, as well as humans. But that, once again, this is something which Sunakatta is not willing to recognize, is not willing to acknowledge. He continues, Sariputta, this Dhamma inference about me will never occur to the foolish man Sunakatta. Using his own mind, the Blessed One knows the minds of other beings and other individuals. He knows a lustful mind as a lustful mind, or a lust-free mind as a lust-free mind. He knows a hate-filled mind as a hate-filled mind, or a hate-free mind as a hate-free mind. He knows a delusional mind as a delusional mind, or a delusion-free mind as a delusion-free mind. He knows a contracted mind as a contracted mind, or a scattered mind as a scattered mind. He knows an expanded mind as an expanded mind, or an unexpanded mind as an unexpanded mind. He knows a surpassable mind as a surpassable mind, or an unsurpassable mind as an unsurpassable mind. He knows a concentrated mind as a concentrated mind, or an unconcentrated mind as an unconcentrated mind. He knows a liberated mind as a liberated mind, or a non-liberated mind as a non-liberated mind. In other words, the Buddha is saying that he does have the ability to read minds. He does have the ability to see what's going on in other people's minds. And this comes up in many places in the suttas, where the Buddha reads the minds of the people who are with him in order to know what he needs to teach to them. So he would look at someone's mind and he would see, okay, this person needs to receive this kind of teaching or that kind of teaching. So he would use this ability in order to know the most effective way of helping people come to an understanding of the Dhamma. But again, he's emphasizing here that even though he has this ability, and even though he uses it to help people understand the Dhamma, because of Sunakatta's delusion, blinded by his own anger, Sunakatta cannot recognize this. Sunakatta is not willing to see this aspect of the Buddha. So the Buddha starts out here by emphasizing, first off, that he's enlightened. Second, that he has all of the standard psychic powers, including the divine ear element, the ability to hear devas as well as humans, and also the ability to read other people's minds. Next, he goes into the list of the 10 Tathagata powers. And this is one of the really significant parts of this sutta. And you'll come across this list of 10 powers taken out of the sutta in many places as a basic description of what a Sammasambuddha is. What are the particular characteristics of a Sammasambuddha? So he says, Sariputta, there are 10 Tathagata powers, possessed of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lion's roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. What 10? So the Tathagata claims his place as leader. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, one of the things that he said was, he said, of all the beings in the entire universe, I am the supreme one. I am the highest. I am the best. And for him, that was not arrogance. That was simply a statement of fact. So a Sammasambuddha is, in fact, the highest being, the most supreme being in an entire universe. It's just the way things are. So for him to say that was not arrogance or conceit. It was simply a statement of the way things are. It's like if I say, oh, I have no hair. I'm not being arrogant. I'm just stating the way things are. Simply a calm, cool acknowledgement of fact. And Royce's lines roar in assemblies. So again, that's the fact that he's willing to openly teach and talk about his realizations and what people can do to come to the same realization. And sets in motion the divine wheel. So divine wheel here is Brahmacakka, which is used effectively synonymously with the term Dhammacakka. So Dhamma wheel, wheel of Dharma. So the divine wheel or the Dharma wheel is referring to the teachings of a Buddha, which then forms this ongoing self-perpetuating cycle of teaching the Dhamma and helping people attain awakening, which extends long after a Sammasambuddha passes away. So I'll go ahead and read through the 10 Tathagata powers. The first one, he says, "Here, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows what is possible and what is impossible." Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows what is possible and what is impossible is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lion's roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. So, a Tathagata knows what is possible and what is impossible. In other words, they have a clear understanding of causality, a clear understanding that certain things require particular causes and conditions in order to happen, which means that there are things which can never happen. So a classic example of this is that you cannot have two Sammasambuddhas in the same world system at the same time. That's impossible. Why is that impossible? Well, it's because of what a Sammasambuddha is. A Sammasambuddha, by definition, is someone who attains enlightenment by themselves in a world system that does not currently have any enlightened beings. So it's impossible for there to be a second one until the first one is completely forgotten. Another thing, by the way, is that it's impossible for a Sammasambuddha to be murdered. Can't be done. You can't kill a Buddha. You can injure one, but you can't kill one. Next he mentions, furthermore, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows the results of actions that have been undertaken, past, present, or future, based on circumstances and causes. Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows the result of actions that have been undertaken, past, present, or future, based on circumstances and causes, is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lion's roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. So this, again, is speaking about the Buddha's ability to recognize causality. So recognizing that any action will bring about a particular result. And a Tathagata, a Sammasambuddha in particular, knows exactly what results will come about from any given action. A Tathagata knows the consequences of any choice. And also taking into account the circumstances around that choice. And the third one, he says, furthermore, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows the practices that lead to every state of being. Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows the practices that lead to every state of being, is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lion's roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. So, the Buddha knows what needs to be done in order to be reborn under any circumstances. So if you want to be born in heaven, he knows what it takes in order to be reborn in heaven. If you want to be Mahabrahma, he knows what it takes in order to become Mahabrahma. If you want to be an enlightened being, he knows what needs to be done in order to become an enlightened being. So the Buddha, a Buddha knows exactly what needs to be done in order to develop the causes and conditions to experience any aspect of samsara, any aspect of reality, any state of being within samsara. He knows what needs to be done in order to have that experience. And elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha also mentions that when he recollected his countless past lives, he realized that at one point or another, he had been every state of being. At one point or another, he had experienced every possible experience in samsara, except awakening. He'd experienced everything except awakening. So he also has personal experience of what he's talking about when he says he knows the practices that lead to every state of being. Next, he says, furthermore, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows all the various elements of the world. Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows all the various elements of the world, is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. All the various elements, that's aneka dhatu, nana dhatu. So dhatu is the components, the fundamental components of things. So normally when we use the word dhatu in Buddhism, we're talking about either the four elements, so earth, water, fire, and air, or the six elements, earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness. But the Buddha also occasionally uses the word dhatu to refer to other things as well. Most notably, nibbana dhatu. Nibbana dhatu is the element of enlightenment, the element of the unconditioned, the element of that which is beyond samsara, not touched by samsara. So the Buddha understands all the various elements of the world. He understands every component of reality. And number 5, furthermore, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows the various dispositions of beings. Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows the various dispositions of beings, is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. In other words, Buddha knows all of the different personality traits, tendencies, habits, behavior patterns of all beings. He understands all the different motivations that people can have. He understands all the different conditioning that people can have. He understands all the different disorders that people can have. So there is no one that a Buddha could meet that a Buddha would not understand. On meeting anyone, a Buddha could understand, well, because you were born in Italy in the 80s, that means such and such. And because you were raised under those conditions, that has shaped you in this way. And because you had those past life experiences, that has given you a tendency to certain kinds of behavior. So Buddha can know in detail someone's personality traits, habits, and tendencies. The circumstances and conditions which have made them what they are. And most importantly, he then knows what teachings are going to be most relevant for that person. A classic example of this is what we call the 3 personality types in Buddhism. So the greed type, the hate type, and the delusion type. So this is a very simple way of talking about and categorizing dispositions of beings. So greed types need to do practices which will reduce their greed. Hate types need to do practices which will reduce their hate. Delusion types, well, they'll muddle through somehow. So they need to do practices which reduce their delusion. So Tathagata would know what someone's type is, and he would know what teachings and practices are going to be most helpful for them. Next, it says, furthermore, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows the capacities and abilities of other beings and other people. Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows the capacities and abilities of other beings and other people, is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. So this is a continuation off the previous one. A Tathagata knows what any being is capable of. He knows what makes them tick. He knows what their limitations are. He knows what they can achieve if they put their mind to So this also is part of what makes a Buddha such a effective teacher, is that a Buddha knows what people are capable of, so he can deliver teachings that are relevant to that person's skill level. So for example, when somebody is brand new to Buddhism, you don't teach them about emptiness and absolute reality. They're not going to get it. You start with very basic things, very simple things, such as, when your mind is filled with desire, are you happy or unhappy? Start with very simple things like that. But you don't go directly into talking about not self and emptiness and the element of the unconditioned, because their eyes are just going to glaze over. They're not going to get it or understand it. They might, but it's phenomenally unlikely. But actually, a Tathagata would know if somebody had the ability to understand advanced teaching, and if they knew that, then they would deliver it. Number 7. Furthermore, Sariputta, a Tathagata truly knows impurity, cleansing, and emergence as regards jhana, liberation, concentration, and attainment. Sariputta, that a Tathagata truly knows impurity, cleansing, and emergence as regards jhana, liberation, concentration, and attainment, is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. In other words, a Tathagata fully understands how to enter deep states of concentration, as well as how to liberate the mind. By the way, this here, where it says jhana, liberation, concentration, and attainment, that's translated as a list, but the Pali is a single compound word. And compound words in Pali are often a bit baffling because there's no clear statement of the relationship between the words and the compound, which means they can be translated in many different ways. And one has to rely on context to try to figure out what is the proper way to translate a compound phrase. So another way to take this compound word is that it's all one thing. So the attainment of samadhi, which is a temporary liberation called jhana. So you could take that all as a single phrase. So rather than jhana, liberation, concentration, and attainment as 4 different things, you can refer to it as a single thing. So attaining the liberating concentration called jhana, which, if I was translating the sutta nowadays, that's probably how I would take this phrase, rather than taking it as a list of 4 different items, as I did whenever I did this translation a while back. This was 2 or 3 years ago that I did this document. The other way is taking it as written, that it refers to 4 separate things. So jhana, which is deep states of samadhi, deep states of concentration. Vimokkha, which is liberation. So that's when the mind is liberated from the defilements, either temporarily or permanently, either to a small degree or a large degree. Concentration is, again, samadhi, so unification of mind. Samapatti is attainment, which usually refers to attainment of some stage of awakening. So, but again, these days I'm thinking that this is all just talking about jhana. So the attainment of the liberating concentration, the liberating samadhi, called jhana. Point being is that a Tathagata knows impurity, which means knows what defilements are preventing us from attaining jhana or attaining liberation. He knows cleansing, which means he knows how to purify the mind of those defilements that are preventing us from making progress. And he knows emergence. In other words, he also knows how to come out of a state of samadhi or a state of concentration without stirring up defilements again. Then number 8. Furthermore, Sariputta, Tathagata remembers numerous past lives. 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, 100 lives, 100,000 lives, many eons of universal expansion, many eons of universal contraction, many eons of universal expansion and contraction. At that place, I had this name, this family, this appearance, this food, this experience of pleasure and pain, this death. Falling from there, I reappeared over there, where I had that name, that family, that appearance, that food, that experience of pleasure and pain, that death. Falling from there, I appeared here. In this way, he remembers numerous past lives and their characteristics in detail. Sariputta, this is the Tathagata power on account of which the Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. In other words, all Sammasambuddhas, all Tathagatas, are able to recollect many, many eons of past lives. They're able to recollect every state of being that they've had prior to attaining awakening. And number 9, furthermore, Sariputta, with divine vision, which is pure and surpasses human vision, a Tathagata sees beings falling and appearing, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in good places and bad places. He understands how beings fare according to their actions. These honorable beings engaged in physical, verbal, and mental misconduct. They disparaged noble beings, they held wrong view, and they based their actions on wrong view. When they were separated from their bodies after death, they appeared in deprivation, a bad destination, downfall, hell. However, these honorable beings engaged in good physical, verbal, and mental conduct. They did not disparage noble beings. They held right view, and they based their actions on right view. When they were separated from their bodies after death, they appeared in a good destination, a heavenly world. In this way, with divine vision, which is pure and surpasses human vision, he sees beings falling and appearing, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in good places and bad places. He understands how beings fare according to their actions. Sariputta, this is the Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. In other words, another one of the abilities that all Sammasambuddhas have is the ability to see how karma and rebirth operate, to see how the choices that people make in one life determines the experiences that they have in future lives. Seeing how when someone dies, the conditions of their rebirth is determined by their past actions. And the circumstances they face in their future lives are based upon what they did in past lives. And noting that it's all based upon the choices that people make. So this is not fatalistic or deterministic, but rather it's indicating that the choices we make determines what we experience in future lives. And he particularly emphasizes having good conduct. So engaging in wholesome conduct of body, speech, and mind. Not insulting or speaking ill of awakened beings. So noble being means awakened being. And trying to hold right view and to base one's actions on right view. So we just recently went through the Sammaditthi Sutta, which was one way of talking about right view. So right view being recognizing causality, recognizing the Four Noble Truths, and recognizing anicca, dukkha, anatta. So impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. And finally, number 10. Furthermore, Sariputta, with the elimination of the corruptions, a Tathagata lives, having here and now reached the corruption-free mental liberation, liberation by wisdom, having personally realized it with higher knowledge. Sariputta, this is a Tathagata power on account of which a Tathagata claims his place as leader, roars his lions roar in assemblies, and sets in motion the divine wheel. In other words, every Sammasambuddha has completely purified their own mind of all defilements and has reached full enlightenment through the development of wisdom. So these are the 10 Tathagata powers. And again, every Sammasambuddha has these 10 powers. So not just Shakyamuni Buddha, not just Gautama Buddha, But every single Buddha in every world system at every time has these 10 abilities. So I think we'll pause there for today and switch to questions and comments. So if there's any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in the live chat and I'll answer as best I can.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And welcome to a few more friends. Junie, good to see you. Long time no see. And Galaxy from Malaysia, hello. Hello to Liz and Grant and Rich. Lots of nice friends. So Michael was mentioning to make the sutra link available earlier. It is actually available in the description of the event. So both in the YouTube description and in like on the events calendar. And if you can't find it in any of those places, you can just go on bhantesudaso.com/suttas and the translations are all there. And Michael is also asking, am I okay thinking I don't care with whether the Buddha has or has not super mundane powers? I'm convinced the practice leads to its stated aim, and that's enough for me. Enlightenment is the goal, practice is the path.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
I mean, that's okay for a period of time, but at some point, it is important to come to recognize that a Buddha does have these abilities, that this is an aspect of awakening. So when one deeply understands the nature of reality, then that brings with it all of these abilities. So this is an important element of a Buddha. A Buddha does have all of these powers and abilities because they clearly understand the nature of reality. They know how to pull the strings. It's like knowing the source code. So those of us who are not coders, we just use programs as they're written and we don't seem to have any control over it. We can only use very limited functionality of the program. We can only use what the end user capabilities are. But someone who's a programmer, a coder, they know the underlying source code and they can go in and rewrite things in order to change the way the program operates. Because they have a much higher level of understanding of what's going on with the program. So it's like that. Most of us are the end users of samsara. We don't know how to change the source code. But a Buddha has a deep, thorough understanding of every detail and aspect of samsara, which means that he can do things which to him are quite simple and easy and straightforward, such as teleportation and mind reading and so on, but which to us seem exceptional or far out or unreachable. But that's just because we have a much lower level of understanding of samsara. Again, it's like the difference between the end user of a program and the programmer who wrote the code in the first place, who knows how to edit and modify the code as they need to.
And Mariella is asking, does having being the presence of the eons Buddha in your lifetime give you any special karma for future lives? Even in the case of Sunakatta, who disregards the Buddha, like does anyone who has been born on earth in that time, and especially those who were born close to the Buddha physically, like animals and people from India, do they get especially good karma, whether they were doing good or bad deeds?
So first off, I would say that to be born at the time and place of a Sammasambuddha already requires very good karma. So no ordinary person is born in the time and place of a Sammasambuddha. It's all people who have some kind of karmic affinity already, who have some kind of connection already. But what they do with that opportunity is a choice that they make. So those who encounter a Sammasambuddha and they treat a Sammasambuddha with respect and they listen attentively and they try to understand, they will get good results. Those who encounter a Sammasambuddha and express no interest and don't make any effort to understand or don't show respect, they will not get good results. So just seeing a Sammasambuddha is not necessarily going to automatically produce good karma. It does, it makes a mark on the mind, but keep in mind that you already had good karma in order to encounter a Sammasambuddha in the first place. So it's the same. Nowadays, we have the good karma to encounter the teachings of a Sammasambuddha. This is very rare. So the reason why we're having this opportunity now is because of our past karma. We've built up an affinity with Buddhism in past lives, which means we're here now with it. But now we have a choice to either strengthen that affinity or weaken it. A lot of people, they encounter the Buddhist teachings and they just don't care. They're just like, yeah, I'm not interested. So even though they have the good karma to encounter Buddhism, they're not strengthening that affinity, which means it will be weaker in future lives. So it's a choice. It's a choice whether we build up that affinity or whether we let it fade away. Okay.
And Maria asks, do you have to experience every state of being before being awakening?
You already have, so you don't need to worry about that.
Nice try.
Remember that samsara is without discoverable beginning. In other words, we've lived countless lives, effectively infinite lives before this one. So over the course of that effectively infinite span of lives, we've experienced everything except enlightenment. The same as the Buddha had. We've experienced every imaginable state of being at one point or another, and it didn't satisfy us. So we don't need to go through that again. We've already done it. So this is actually a really useful reflection. When you find yourself wanting something, wanting an experience, you can just remind yourself, oh, I already had it and it wasn't satisfying. So you think, oh, I really want to be in a relationship with this kind of person with those traits and those qualities, and that would just be fabulous. Then you remind yourself, no, I already had that. And clearly it didn't solve my problems because here I am again.
And Jens says, Bhante, does Sunakatta's acknowledgement of the benefit of the path but failure to understand the abilities of the Buddha point to how his view will limit his progress on the path?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, this is, you actually hear a lot of people these days making similar statements as Sunakatta. People saying, oh, the Buddha was just an ordinary human being. He didn't actually have all those powers and abilities. He didn't actually see karma and rebirth because it's not real anyway. But he does teach stuff that makes you happier. You hear people say that all the time these days. Yeah, that will limit your abilities of attainment quite a bit. Because the Dhamma is meant to be a radical bedrock transformation of our mind, which completely flips upside down. Or actually, it's taking an upside down perspective and flipping it right side up. But it completely flips the way we look at the world, the way we relate to the world, the way we experience the world. That means we need to be willing to change every aspect of how we view reality. We won't necessarily change every aspect of how we view reality, but we need to be willing to. We need to be willing to switch all of that. So that also means things that we might think are impossible, such as mind reading and teleportation and levitation and so on. We actually do need to acknowledge that these things could be possible if one develops one's mind in a particular way. And so a Sammasambuddha, since they have a perfect understanding of reality, then that naturally means that they must have all of these other powers as well. It's inescapable.
Thank you, Bhante. And Sean asks, you mentioned delusion practices. Can you elaborate?
Delusion practices? Yeah, so the three types, delusion types, have the most difficult time making progress because their minds tend to be very muddled and confused. So one of the most important things for delusion types actually is to engage in Dhamma discussion with advanced practitioners. Because that helps them to see their own wrong view and to understand where they've gotten mixed up and confused. Another really important thing for delusion types is mindfulness of the body, because it helps keep them grounded in direct experience so that they're less likely to drift off into fantasy or delusion or imagination or confusion of any sort. Of course, reading the suttas is also really good. Listening to Dhamma talks is really important, and so on. But especially those things, discussing with advanced practitioners and practicing mindfulness of the body. Those are especially important for delusion types.
And Bradley appreciates the programming analogy. He says it's very apt. He also says, I remember the suttas that talk about the rarity of even human rebirth, which is easy to take for granted. As rare as a one-eyed turtle surfacing once every 100 years to randomly poke its head through a piece of wood drifting randomly through the ocean.
Yeah.
All right, and there's some other thank yous, appreciations for the talk. I second that as well. And there's no more questions as of now. But I wanted to bring forward, while we were going through this sutta, something appeared in my mind in terms of like the qualities of the Buddha. And I was wondering if perhaps, in your opinion, the Mahayana path, when we talk about the aspiration of becoming a Buddha, isn't necessarily like a Sammasambuddha, but also an Anubuddha with the qualities of a Sammasambuddha. Because I was also thinking about, in the Tibetan tradition, Padmasambhava, that they call the Buddha on earth, the second Buddha. So with these particular qualities of the Buddha.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, possibly. Because that's a way to be of benefit to many beings and to help many beings attain awakening. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a Sammasambuddha in order to have a major positive impact in a world and bring a lot of people closer to awakening. You can also do so as an Anubuddha. The only path which seems like a little bit of a dead end to me is the Pacceka Buddha path. Since the Pacceka Buddha, by definition, lacks teaching abilities. By definition, they have not developed the ability to help other people along the way. So that strikes me as a bit of a dead end. Though one viewpoint is that it's not a dead end, but that's another complicated discussion to have one of these days. But yeah, to become an arhat with strong teaching capabilities and the vow to help others attain awakening, yeah, that still seems like a very wonderful Mahayana-like thing to do. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was very inspired actually while I was reading it. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because I never actually quite understood why they were defining Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava.
When you learn Pali, you'll remember these names more easily. But Padma is lotus, Sang means self or together, and Bhava means produce, become.
Yeah.
So the one who is self-born from a lotus is what his name means.
Lovely. Yeah, so I was always confused why he was referred to as like the second Buddha, etc. But as we were going through this sutta, it occurred to me, I was like, oh, well, basically all the qualities of a Buddha except for the fact that he followed the teachings of a Buddha.
Yeah, similarly with people like Ajahn Chah, or Ajahn Mun, people who were not Sammasambuddhas, but they were most likely arhats who had developed a lot of Sammasambuddha qualities, including the qualities of being a excellent teacher.
Mm-hmm. And I believe Ajahn Mun was the one who said that he had taken previously the Bodhisattva vows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is all kind of coming into place. That's what he's saying. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Sally says, sorry for joining in the middle. How could we understand how the world is working, politics, leaders, trends, etc., when we don't have the Buddha's wisdom yet? At our level, how can we develop the ability to see the truth?
We'll start with looking at your own mind. Realistically, we have a hard enough time understanding our own mind without trying to understand other people's minds. So start with understanding your own mind. As far as the major forces that are going on in the world, though, you'll realize it's not really dramatically different from the forces in your own mind. It's just greed, hatred, and delusion happening on the scale of millions of people rather than on the scale of one person. But it's the same basic stuff. You look at stories of politicians and you'll see like, okay, that's a story of greed, hatred, and delusion. That's a story of greed, hatred, and delusion. That's actually a story of kindness and generosity. Okay, that one's pretty good. No, there's another greed, hatred, and delusion story. It's all pretty recognizable stuff. Because, again, most politicians and people operating on large scales are unenlightened beings filled with defilements, just like everybody else. So we can recognize their behavior patterns as not being particularly different from any other unenlightened being. They just have the ability to influence much larger numbers of people, which then means that the karmic consequences of their choices will be much, much stronger. So it's actually quite a gamble to be powerful and influential. If you use that power and influence for positive effects, then you'll make a tremendous amount of good karma. But if you use it to do harmful things, you will make a mind-boggling amount of bad karma. If you hurt one person, that's bad. If you hurt 300 million people, that is 300 million times as bad. But it's still the same basic defilements operating, the same basic greed, hatred, and delusion. So start with understanding your own mind. And then you can understand the mind of world-level politics more easily.
And Michael says, thank you, Bhante. This is hard for me, I must admit. Perhaps I'm picking and choosing among the suttas. Speaking of belief, how about the many miraculous events described in, for example, in the Lotus Sutra, gatherings of myriad Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, flower petals, etc.?
Well, first off, it being difficult for you, that's not surprising. So it's very common for convert Buddhists, especially if they come from scientific materialist backgrounds. It's very common for convert Buddhists to have a hard time with the more seemingly miraculous and supernatural side of Buddhism. And many people, it takes them years and years and years before they start to understand that this makes perfect sense and fits in seamlessly with the rest of the Buddhist teachings. And especially Western convert Buddhists, they normally start off by getting interested in Buddhism as a nice philosophy of how to be happy with some nice practical meditation techniques to help you learn how to be happy. And that's part of Buddhism, no doubt about it, that's part of Buddhism. But Buddhism is so much more than that. And similarly, in the beginning, relating to the Buddha as an ordinary human, just like you and me, who was a really smart guy who figured out how to be happy and figured out some cool ways to meditate to make you happy. So again, relating to the Buddha as a very ordinary kind of being. But as one's practice develops, then we start to realize, no, the Buddha was not an ordinary being at all. He was extraordinary in every sense of the word. Not unreachable. We can become Buddhas as well. We can attain the same qualities that he attained. But he was extraordinary. He was not just some nice guy who liked to lead meditation retreats. He was extraordinary in every sense of the word. So yeah, if you're having a hard time with that, that's okay. Put it on the shelf for now and focus on developing the parts of Buddhism that you can relate to, but remain open to the other things. So also this sutta in particular, there's a reason why we're only just now getting to it after 2 months or so. Has it been 2 months? How long have we been doing these live streams?
Since March, so almost 3 months.
March, April, May, June. Yeah, 3 months. 3 months now we've been doing these live streams. And only just now are we getting to the sutta. And one reason for that is because I didn't want to introduce it too soon. Because this is a sutta which sometimes upsets or confuses people, especially when they're new to Buddhism. Actually, Ayasoma hated this sutta the first time she read it. She was just like, what is this? And I tried to explain it, and she was like, I don't like it. But now she quite likes it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just took a little while.
It's true. It was one of the few suttas that I didn't have Dhammasukha at the very beginning. But now I'm like, oh, I get it now. I get it.
Whereas when I read this sutta, I'm just like, yeah, rock on, Buddha. Preach it, brother. That's what I'm like. I'm like, that's my man. Yay, Buddha. That's me. I really love this sutta. Anyway, can you read his question again? I want to make sure I answered everything he was asking about.
Speaking of belief, how about the many miraculous events described in example Lotus Sutra? Gatherings of myriad Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, flower petals, etc. Well,
gathering of myriad Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, that's all perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. Awakened beings tend to like other awakened beings. Bodhisattvas tend to like other bodhisattvas and like hanging out with Buddhas and so on. That's all perfectly understandable. Also, the ability to travel between different world systems is attested to in the suttas. So again, it's not out of the question. Flowers raining from the sky is one of those standard miraculous events, which you see a few places in the suttas. And usually that's understood as being devas expressing their appreciation for the enlightened beings by making flowers rain from the sky. So I'm actually quite fine with that. As for the Lotus Sutra, as much as I love Mahayana, and as much as I like a lot of Mahayana texts, I do not believe the Lotus Sutra came from the Buddha's lips. I personally believe that the Lotus Sutra was a later composition that was written hundreds of years after the Buddha's death. And it has a lot of questionable content, which is quite hard to reconcile with the suttas. It also has some nice things. So in particular, chapter 2 and chapter 25, which are in fact the two chapters which are most commonly studied when people study the Lotus Sutra or talk about the Lotus Sutra. Chapters 2 and 25 are pretty good. I like those chapters. The rest of it makes me perk an eyebrow and go, okay, who made up this stuff seriously? Again, I don't feel that way about all Mahayana sutras. I actually quite like a lot of the content in other Mahayana sutras, but the Lotus Sutra in particular strikes me as clearly spurious.
And Gita proves of the yes, Bhante, rock on Buddha, yes. Key says this is postdoctoral level after the lockdown PhD program.
Yeah.
And Sally says, what's going on in the world now sometimes confused me. I felt it's so hard to see the truth under the stage. I was wondering through Buddhist practice whether we can develop the ability to see truth. Rael says, with the right understanding of history and an understanding of the social sciences, we can understand what is happening right now. It's all causes, reactions, and positionality. There is a lot of historical karma to play, at least I think, since my background is in social sciences.
Yeah, I agree with both of you.
Great. And Galaxy says, it seems like the Buddha is capable of doing and knowing everything. Is the Buddha omnipotent? Or is there anything that cannot be done by him, even if he wanted to?
So as far as I can tell, a Buddha is still operating according to the rules of cause and effect. So as far as I can tell, a Buddha is not capable of breaking causality. They're not capable of breaking cause and effect. So they fully understand all the tricks of samsara and how to manipulate samsara in order to get effects and results which ordinary people have a hard time getting. But they can't rewrite the rules of samsara. So for example, a Buddha cannot make somebody live forever. They just couldn't do it. It's just not possible. They can't remove someone's past karma. Can't be done. Everyone experiences their past karma. There's no getting around that one. So a Buddha can't change the basic structure of samsara. It's not possible. So no, a Buddha is not omnipotent. They have a tremendous array of powers and abilities, but it's not unlimited. Okay. Yeah, from a Buddhist standpoint, there is no being which is omnipotent and no being which is immortal. As far as omniscience, this is where things start to get interesting. So a Buddha is described in the suttas as having limited omniscience or specific omniscience. So at one point in the suttas, people asked the Buddha, do you know and see all things at all times? And the Buddha said, no. But if I point my mind towards knowing anything, then I know it. So in other words, a Buddha does not have complete, total, permanent omniscience, but he has specific omniscience, which is the ability to know anything if he points his mind at it. So that's also, again, there are limits to a Buddha's abilities. They cannot break the rules of samsara, but they understand the rules of samsara in such detail and precision that they're able to manipulate it in ways that seem miraculous to the rest of us. Okay, anything else?
Yes. Galaxy also says, these 10 Tathagata qualities are useful in teaching the Dhamma to other beings. Should we make a vow in our progression on the path so that we are capable of teaching others when we are enlightened?
That's a very compassionate thing to do. So yeah, I recommend it. It's not strictly required, but I highly recommend it. Also because you're building up the karma of other people helping you on the path. When you help others on the path, then you build up the karma for others to help you. And if you make a vow to develop teaching abilities to help others attain awakening, then you are more likely to encounter others who can help you attain awakening. So yes, definitely build up that Dhamma karma, the Dharma karma. It'll help you on the way.
And Liz says, Bhante, earlier you said something to the effect that there will not be another Buddha until this one is forgotten. Why can there be only one Buddha?
Well, it's just the way a Sammasambuddha is defined. A Sammasambuddha is defined as somebody who attains awakening at a time when Buddhism is not known, and has the abilities to teach others the path to awakening. That's the basic definition of a Sammasambuddha. So if there's already a Sammasambuddha in a world, then there can't be a second one. By definition, there can't be. Or if the teachings of a Sammasambuddha are still available, then again, by definition, there can't be another one. Can another one arise? By definition. It's just the way the word Sammasambuddha is defined. But you could have somebody who has all the qualities of a Sammasambuddha, who attains awakening during a time when the teachings of the Sammasambuddha are still around. And they would be fully enlightened, and they would be an amazing teacher, and they would help a lot of people, but we would not call them a Sammasambuddha. We would still call them an Arhat or an Anubuddha, because they are arising in a time and place where there was already Buddhism present. Okay.
And Jens says, Bhante, can you speak of Saddha and understanding the capabilities of the Buddha?
Well, Satta means faith or confidence. So, yeah, faith in the Buddha, faith that the Buddha was fully enlightened. This is actually the most fundamental principles of faith in Buddhism, is faith that the Buddha was an enlightened being. Faith that the Buddha knew the path to awakening. Faith that the teachings the Buddha gave lead to awakening if followed. This is the basic level of faith in Buddhism. And then from that, as one's understanding of Buddhism grows, as one comes to a deeper understanding of how the Dhamma all fits together, then one can come to have faith in these other qualities of the Buddha, such as the 10 Tathagata powers. But the basic level of faith is just faith that the Buddha was enlightened and that his teachings lead to enlightenment. It's the basic level of faith.
Right, and Michael says these would be Buddhas who have not yet reached Parinibbana. Is that right? If we say that the Buddhas gather together after their Parinibbana, we have a conflict with Theravada, I think.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So there's a pervasive misunderstanding in the Theravada world, and this is not all Theravadins, of course, but many Theravadan practitioners have this implicit belief that Arhants and Buddhas cease to exist when they die. This is not what the Buddha said. The Buddha did not say that Parinibbana means non-existence. The Buddha did not say that an enlightened being ceases to exist when they die. In fact, he said that that's a wrong understanding. He said that's a misunderstanding. That's a fallacy. He said it's not accurate to say that an enlightened being ceases to exist after death. It's also not accurate to say that they continue to exist after death. Nor is it accurate to say that they both exist and not exist. Nor is it accurate to say that they neither exist nor do not exist. None of these are accurate statements. All of them are completely missing the reality of an enlightened being. We're trying to use the concepts of samsara to describe a being which is not subject to samsara. It just doesn't work that way at all. It's like asking, what does the color blue smell like? Just doesn't make any sense. So we do encounter some stories of people having encounters with past Buddhas and past Arhants. What's going on there? Well, it's hard to say for sure. I can present various theories about what might be going on there. But I have absolutely no trouble whatsoever accepting that these things are possible. It's only from our limited perspective that it's hard to see how that could happen. And again, especially if we're coming from this pervasive belief that enlightened beings cease to exist. And this is so common. I've even met many monastics who have this belief that enlightened beings cease to exist after death. It's extremely common, even though the Buddha clearly contradicts it countless times in the suttas. Nonetheless, this viewpoint persists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Bradley says, basically, you can't say anything about an enlightened being.
Well, you can't describe them in terms of existence or non-existence. That's closer to the truth.
Bradley also had mentioned earlier, I suppose if the Buddha were omnipotent, then we wouldn't need a path. He could just bestow enlightenment upon us.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it comes down to the. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's a term that's used in Christianity. The something paradox. Do you remember? We talked about it in the Buddhist Catholic Dialogue once.
Mm.
It's sometimes called the problem of suffering. Like, if God is omniscient, omnipotent, and benevolent, why do we suffer? Why is there pain? It's one of these basic paradoxes in Christian theology. And the inevitable conclusion is that, following this line of thought, God cannot have all three of those qualities. He can have 2 out of 3, but he can't have all 3.
Okay, no.
So it's the same. If the Buddha was omniscient and omnipotent and benevolent, then we would not experience dukkha, because he would have fixed that already. But he's not omnipotent because, as I said, a Buddha cannot change our karma. A Buddha cannot change the course of causality. They can describe it so that we make different choices, but they cannot change it for us. We have to make those choices ourselves. Therefore, a Buddha is not omnipotent, in the sense that they cannot change the rules of reality. Okay?
And Pete says, should the possibility of embellishment added in over time be a consideration at all? Does it matter if what was added is still in line with the Dhamma?
So it's almost certain that there were some alterations, additions, subtractions made to the Pali Suttas over time, almost certainly. So it is necessary to have a certain critical eye when reading the suttas to identify what is Dhamma and what maybe was a later alteration. Realistically, though, 99.9% of the material contained in the Pali Suttas is incredibly self-consistent and upholds a clear, unified message that points towards awakening. And there is this tiny, tiny fraction of anomalous material, which clearly stands out as being anomalous. It's kind of like when you have a red brick wall, and it's all this huge array of thousands and thousands of red bricks all lined up perfectly. And then just randomly, there's a green brick. And you're like, okay, where did this green brick come from? It clearly doesn't fit in with all the other red bricks. Mm-hmm. So that's what it's like when you read the suttas. Every now and then, not very often, but every once in a very rare while, you'll come across a green brick. Something in the suttas which just sticks out as like, wait a minute, this doesn't quite seem to fit in with the other material. Very rare, but there are a handful of places in the suttas which I could point to. And on those occasions, usually it's good to go and talk to some monks. Ask them, like, what is this? This doesn't quite seem to fit in. And they might explain it in a way which makes you see that actually it does fit in. And it was just our own misunderstanding which made it seem like it was out of place. Or they might acknowledge, yeah, that's something a bit weird, which doesn't seem to match. Maybe that was a later alteration. So, for example, some of the sexist content in the suttas, there's actually very little sexist content in the suttas. The majority of the suttas, the Buddha makes it quite clear that gender has no relevance whatsoever to the path of awakening. But then there's this tiny fraction of sexist material. So it sticks out. It's like, wait a minute, this doesn't match up with all the other stuff the Buddha was saying. So it's not unreasonable to say that was probably a later addition. But things like this, where it's talking about the 10 Tathagata powers, this all fits in perfectly with the rest of the suttas. There's no anomaly here. There's nothing here which looks out of place. All of this fits in quite neatly with the rest of the teachings in the suttas. So I don't see that going on in this sutta. The sutta doesn't seem anomalous to me at all. But that's my own opinion. Take it for what it's worth.
And Mark is asking, I have attended many Buddhist groups that believe that whole thing about non-existence, and it has never seemed correct to me. Could you tell me what sutta the Buddha says that being neither exist or don't exist?
There are countless suttas where the Buddha brings this up. If you send me an email, I can get you some specific references.
You can send an email at info@buddhistinsights.com. And
there's actually a very specific one where somebody asked the Buddha, does an awakened being appear again after their death? And the Buddha said, the term appear does not apply, and the term doesn't appear does not apply. In other words, he's saying that you can't say that an enlightened being either does or does not appear again after their death. Neither statement is accurate. I can give you the sutta quote, sutta reference if you send an email.
And Bradley says, I've seen numerous debates over the whole arhats have a special type of consciousness after enlightenment. That might be beyond the scope of this talk. Yes, monastics like to talk about this subject matter a lot. So there will be countless debates and different viewpoints on this subject matter that you will find. But is that really important? Maybe we should just practice so we can find out for ourselves. So Bhante says, one is in Sanyutta Nikaya 44.1 with Kema.
Who said that?
Bradley.
Oh, you called him Bhante again.
Oh, it must be a Freudian slip. I want Bradley to become a Bhante so much that I call him Bhante already. And Sally says, thanks, Bhante. I realize we can't just pick up a piece of word and then believe it totally.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's all for this morning. Thank you for asking such beautiful questions, and thank you, Bhante, for teaching the beautiful Dhamma. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So we'll be meeting again in less than 12 hours, less than 11 hours, actually. This morning has been a little bit longer than usual. And we will have our special guest monk, Bhante Jayasara, who will be sharing thoughts on metta. So on the other parami of metta, which is very important to develop, especially in these crazy times these days. But anyway, even in less crazy times, always good to develop metta. So we'll meet you at 7:30 p.m. again. And Sally says, much Dhamma Sukha. Yes, it's very good. May the world be peaceful. May it indeed. So see you at 7:30, and tomorrow morning we'll study the second part of this sutta. So if you have any questions in the meanwhile, bring them up tomorrow. All right, have a great